Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today I will be ranting about books that I hate. So I've had a few comments recently and people are saying that they really enjoy when I start ranting about books, and I feel like it's quite rare that I do get annoyed enough by a book to do like a full book rant, because these days I'm pretty good at picking up books that I know that I'm gonna like, or at least find something that I like about them. I don't read that many one-star books, and for me, like, a one-star book is something that has like actively pissed me off, something that is really bad in my opinion. And this can be either just, I think that the quality of the writing is bad, the actual story itself, or just that it is about something that has just rubbed me up the wrong way completely and I despise it. And a lot of the time these books are really popular books because that's why I read them in the first place. I'm usually a very curious person, and if something is incredibly hyped, then I want to know what the hell is going on and why everyone likes it so much. So I will usually pick up some hyped books. So usually when I get to read these books that end up being one star, they are actually pretty hyped. So today I'm going to give you roughly 10, I think there's 10 books in this list that are really popular and I really hate them. All of the usual disclaimers here. Obviously, if you like these books, then you are in the majority here. These are incredibly popular books with huge fan bases and people who love them. I just think it's interesting and fun to point out when you have a very different opinion about a very well-loved book. But also, a lot of the time when I talk about how I didn't like these books, other people say that they also didn't like them and they want me to like do a more in-depth review about the reason why I didn't like that book to see if it matches up with the experience that they had. So that's what today's video is going to be. As usual in all of my videos, we've got a huge mix of genres here. We've got fantasy books, we've got classics, we've got contemporary, we've got literary fiction, and we have young adult as well. I don't think we have any non-fiction on this list, but you know, no genre is safe from a Lid Loves book rant. So why don't we start with the only book that I actually still own physically? And before you say anything about why am I holding on to books that I don't like, I'm trying to sell this. Apparently no one else wants it either. So maybe it's not quite as popular as I think. But in fact, I know that this one's incredibly popular because it's got a quite popular TV show actually adapted about it as well. And that book is Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmus. I was really excited to read this book when I first picked it up because it's like such a mix of the things that I love as someone who studied science and also loves stories about kind of forgotten women and like rewritten historical books. I thought that this would be right up my street, and I ended up literally like having to force myself to finish it because I just really wanted to see what would happen in the end, and then it annoyed me even more. So this book is about Elizabeth Zott, and she is a chemist. This book is set in the 1960s where she has to fight tooth and nail to be taken seriously in anything that she's doing in her job. But there's one exception in her very male-dominated field, someone who does take her seriously. Then in a few years' time, when Elizabeth finds herself as a single mother and without her job in science, she reluctantly takes a job offer to be the host of a cooking show, where her no-nonsense take to science and nutrition behind cooking and caring for your family makes her like a mega star. This book is described as laugh out loud funny and a incredibly feminist take on equality in the 1960s. I would deny it on both counts. It's not funny at all. There are some aspects of the book that I could see was going for humour in some of the slightly more bizarre aspects of it, but a lot of this book is incredibly traumatic. There's like really devastatingly sad things that happen, including big content warnings for sexual assault and violence against women, as well as emotional abuse and grief, death of a loved one. And a lot of these things are described in quite graphic detail as well. So I would not say that it's this very light-hearted and funny read at all, but that's not the reason why I didn't like it, although it is part of the reason. I think that the tone of the whole book was very, very confused. It didn't know what it wanted to be, whether it wanted to be a kind of wry comedy, if it wanted to be historical fiction, if it wanted to be a romance book even. A lot of the tone was incredibly muddled, but my main issue with this book is you're following Elizabeth throughout this book, and depending on the situation that she is placed in, her character kind of entirely changes to suit that situation. She's described as this like not your average woman, and a lot of the way that you can read her character is that she is neurodivergent, like perhaps somewhere on the autistic spectrum. But this is never explicitly said, and I think that's to the detriment of the character as well. But then also there are some points in this book where, as someone who has self-proclaimed zero interest in politics or society or relationships, she will come out with these entire monologues straight from the year 2020 or whenever this was written, and she's used as a mouthpiece for these like incredibly evolved feminist ideas. Evolved in the sense of like they wouldn't be thinking about feminism like this in the 1960s, not evolved in the sense of particularly interesting. They're still very, very basic ideas about equality and feminism. A lot of it really screams to me this kind of white women feminism. So I think while I had issues with a lot of the like accuracy, the writing style and the tone of the book, the main egregious issue with this book for me was the main character herself. She was just created to be this absolutely perfect woman who can literally do whatever she wants all of the time, but is also incredibly snobby and mean, and especially like compared to all of the other women characters in this book, which is supposed to be a feminist book, who are all really depicted as these awful people. They're kind of pitched as these incredibly backward and like horribly conniving and evil women, but there's not really any kind of take on like the society that they've grown up in. It's just like as if that they are small-minded people. A lot of the science really annoyed me in this as well, like that's just a smaller point. I mean, basically I just really didn't like this book at all. And also it has huge like elements of fantasy in it, not just because of like how ridiculous a lot of the plot is and a lot of the character is, but like actually, hello Mise. Misa's gonna come join in. Want to see her? Oh, sorry. It's just a butt. You wanna say hi? You wanna say hi? Say hello to the camera? You sweet girl. You say hi. You're all wet. So the last thing that I wanted to say about this book is basically that Misa wants to sit on my lap. The last thing I just wanted to say about the tone of this book is that Misa, please. Is that there are huge aspects that are like utterly fantasy, and not just because of like the ridiculous like things that happen, and especially this like Mary Sue main character, but like there is actually a talking dog in this. There's a perspective from the position of a dog. Like it just doesn't know what it wants to be. Basically I hated it, so I've already ranted for too long about this book, but yeah, I didn't like it at all. Next up, let's talk about a book that I read this year, and it was actually supposed to be a fantasy, and this was the final book in a series, and I hated it so much that now I'm looking back at the rest of the series and I'm thinking, was I literally insane when I read the other book in this series? Because it was that bad that it's making me reevaluate my entire system. And that book is The Atlas Complex. I've already talked about this book a little bit, like in my previous wrap-ups and stuff. Just the way that this book ruined such a good potential series, I can't get over it. This book is the third and final book in, what's it called? The Atlas 6 trilogy, I guess. That starts with the Atlas 6, and then you have the Atlas Complex that I didn't like as well, and then you have the Atlas Paradox. Is it Atlas? No, which way around is that? I'll have it on the screen either way. But the final book in this series not only like was even worse than the second one, which already was disappointing, was so bad that it just like absolutely retroactively ruined the things that I liked about the first book, which I rated it 5 stars, that first book, because it is this story about these 6 characters who are invited to take a place in this society that is basically all surrounding the Library of Alexandria. So you have these 6 different people in this secret society, and all of them are just like incredibly hungry for knowledge and power, and it's all about their interpersonal relationships, and the way that it's written from each of the different perspectives, this is the first book, is done so well and so interesting. I read it when it was a self-published book, and I loved it because it had all of the depth of these like really interesting different relationships, and like how you would envision one conversation to have gone, and then you jump into another character's head, and then you see through their kind of like own biases and like how they've been like interacting with the world. You see how they've interpreted this same conversation. I also really liked the magic system. It was like very strange, but it was also very scientific based. So it was still magic, but it had like this grounding in like physics that was so interesting to me. And then honestly, the second and third book, just I can't even talk about it. Like they were just so bad. The author was so clearly much more concerned with trying to craft a beautiful sentence every single time that they completely lost like the plot in terms of the actual plot of what the hell was going on, because nothing was happening and also nothing made sense. But also like the highlight of these books is the character works, and then just these characters were just destroyed, and I just don't stand the logic even, because like it's not even like there were certain decisions that were made that I didn't like because I like certain characters. It's like the characters themselves were destroyed by the end, so I literally did not care what was happening because none of them were consistent, none of them had any kind of emotional depth. Like they would just say random things, and it was so concerned with like sounding really cool and sounding really dramatic that like nothing then sounded cool and dramatic, because you had nothing that was actually solid to grip onto. And it was just, yeah, I just absolutely hated this book. Although this is a popular book and this video is around popular books that I don't like, everyone agrees with me on this one. It's like one of the lowest rated, I think, on my Goodreads. I want to see actually what it is actually rated, because I don't think anyone liked it. Oh my god, it's got 2.87 on Goodreads, which is insane, from 21,000 ratings. And that is the third one in a series. Usually things get rated higher as they go through the series because you're kind of filtering out the people who wouldn't be interested in it. So this is like from fans, you know? Like, no, it was so disappointing. Next up, let's talk about a classic that I rated 1 star. I hated this book so much, and I'm glad that I didn't let it put me off reading other classics. And you'll understand what I mean when I say the book, because I did actually read this years ago. This is For Whom the Bell Tolls by Ernest Hemingway, and this is my first introduction to Hemingway. And I have since read about 3 more of his books. I think I've read like 4 or 5 total. And this one is so far the worst, but it also really highlights a lot of the issues that I have with him as an author in general. And honestly, I can't say much more other than it was so boring. I think it took me about 9 months to read this book, because I just genuinely, I didn't want to give up, although I did give up for like long periods of time. And I kept going back to it like, oh, I just want to finish this so I can have an opinion on it, just so like I've read a Hemingway. And honestly, I wish I just went back and told myself, don't even bother finishing it, because it is so mind-numbingly boring. There is something about this book that is just so flat, so dull, on the sentence level as well. Hemingway has a definite style that I know that I don't get on with, but I can deal with it kind of in smaller bursts or in different books. But the actual characters in the plot that was going on, like, what plot? Like, the way that it was working with, like, stories within the story wasn't working at all. Like, there was so much that was just, like, absolutely mind-numbingly dull for this book. And honestly, looking back, I can't believe that I carried on and read other Hemingways. I think I only did because they were so much shorter. So also, this book is hefty. It's like 500 pages, or like close to 500 pages. I just absolutely hated it, and I can't even tell you more about it, but other than that it was boring, because I cannot even remember what actually happened. I remember certain aspects of it, and I can't remember how they all connect together. Like, nothing about it was engaging for me. It's about a guy, he's like a soldier, like an American guy, but he's fighting in this anti-fascist guerrilla war in Spain. Sounds like it would be interesting. It's not. His whole job is basically to blow up this bridge. It's like a fucking nightmare. It's so boring. I would love, if you've read Hemingway books, if you could like give me a little ranking, and like, do you think that this one is good? If you like his other books, or do you just not like Hemingway either? Because I don't love Hemingway, although I enjoyed his like non-fiction a lot more than this book, definitely. So, okay, so next up, let's talk young adult contemporary. This, I think people are going to think that I'm absolutely heartless, because I don't know anyone else who didn't like this book, and it's got like almost 1 million like ratings on Goodreads, and I rated it 1 star. And this one I feel like, well, let me tell you what the book is. The book is They Both Die at the End. Yeah, everyone loves this book, and I feel kind of bad that I don't like it, but I have to speak my truth. But I have to like say, this one I will understand a lot more why some people would really, really love this book, but it's not for everyone, and it wasn't for me. I think for a young adult book, this has got a good amount of like diversity, and this is very much about like a queer kind of, not really coming of age, because they are dying at the end of the book, but kind of a like queer exploration. It's about these 2 young boys and their friendship and romantic relationship on the last day of their life. But just for me, as I was reading this book, I was constantly distracted either by the writing or by aspects of the book that didn't make sense. But basically, in this story, it's a world in the kind of near future. It's a slightly sci-fi world where basically on the day that you're going to die, you get a call letting you know that that is your last day to be alive and you can die at any point during that day. This is something that is not explained at all, which I feel annoyed me as a sci-fi lover. But basically in this world, it's kind of not the point, I guess, but in this world, there is an app called The Last Friend, I think, and you can basically, on the day that you're going to die, meet up with someone to spend the day with them as well. Either someone else who's going to die or like another person who's volunteered to like spend the day with someone who's going to die. But you don't have any knowledge about what's going to happen to you and you don't know when it's going to happen within the day, which just sounds like hell, honestly. I wish there was a little bit more of explanation on like how society's got to this point where people want to know the day that they're going to die, how this technology's been, you know, introduced, or is it magic, or is it like what's going on? But it's definitely not the point. It's not a sci-fi book in any way. It's like a contemporary young adult. Like that's how it reads. And so you're following the perspective of these two teen boys and their last day to be alive. I think that a lot of this book relied on the fact that they die at the end, and like that's a lot of the tension of the story, is knowing that they're going to die at some point. And so for me it felt like so much of this book was absolute filler, and like there's lots of other side characters that do not add anything, and also the relationship between the two main characters, like their chemistry was to me non-existent. Like anytime they were talking to each other, like it's insta love to like the extreme, which you can kind of expect. But a lot of the way that they're like trying to build this relationship and this rapport between the two characters doesn't make any sense to me. The writing itself was like not heinous, it's pretty basic, but a lot of the times just there'll be like a line or like something thrown out there that either doesn't make sense, it just pulls you straight out of the story, or it's like something that's like very cliche or very tropey, so you just kind of feel like you're like rolling your eyes a little bit. So for this one, I do think that there's like a strong concept here, and there are certain aspects that I can like get behind, especially for a young adult. But just most of the book felt like filler, and I just ended up getting really, really bored, especially when there's all these side characters that like don't really add anything, and then you're just completely taken out of the main POV characters of the story and placed in like someone who's like randomly just walking past them, and then you'll have like a chapter in their head, and like it doesn't add anything. Like I kind of get what they were trying to do of like everyone matters, everyone's got their own thing going on, and like you never know like someone else's head, but like it was just actually to read was like pretty unbearable, and I just did not like this one at all. Next up we have another adult contemporary historical fiction book that is incredibly popular. How many ratings does this have on Goodreads? 3.2 million ratings on Goodreads, which is insane, with an average of 4.38 stars. That is insanely high. For me, this is a 1-star book, and that book is Where the Crawdads Sing. I hated, and I feel similarly in a way about this book as I do to Lessons in Chemistry, in the sense of it being really muddled in terms of tone. Like, is it trying to be a historical fiction book? Is it trying to be a crime mystery book? Is it trying to be a romance book? It's not as egregious in terms of tone as like Lessons in Chemistry. We have other issues with Where the Crawdads Sing, but it is still that like constant muddying vibe. Similar also to Lessons in Chemistry, my main issue here is that with the main character. Basically, in this book, the Marsh girl, who is a girl who lives on the fringes of this society, and she's grown up in extreme poverty, and by the time she's like basically 9 years old, she's abandoned and she's living there on her own in this shack in the marshes. She doesn't go to school, she doesn't like interact with the community except for like where she absolutely needs to, and she like basically survives out in the marshes on her own. That on its own is an interesting concept. I like survivalist stories, you know, I think that is really interesting if it was based a bit more in reality, but it really wasn't. Like a lot of the ways in which like the day-to-day is sorted out in this book do not make sense. There are so many like tiny, it feels like nitpicky points about this book that just like completely took me out of the believability of the story. But like I said, the main issue is with the Marsh girl herself, who is, as I said, abandoned as a young child and never goes to school, but somehow grows up to be like a world famous naturalist, a biologist, also an incredible writer of poetry, just like this like extremely educated, sophisticated woman, despite her basically never having a friend in her life apart from two very strained romantic relationships. But basically everything she manages to accomplish in this book is just like so far beyond belief, and like it becomes a fantasy story, but not in any of the good ways of like a fantasy story with rules about anything, because anything that she manages to achieve just doesn't feel well earned or worked for. She's just like the manic pixie dream girl trope, but like while the author is trying to make sure you don't think that she is that, even though she clearly is. And like for a book that is supposed to be so ingrained in like the beautiful nature that she is a part of, and as a character who loves nature so much, I didn't get any of that from this book. Like a lot of the nature writing is like very overwrought, and like it takes away from like the beauty of actually being in nature where things can be described beautifully but like more simply. I don't know, like a lot of the writing was really overwritten. And honestly, one of my biggest issues is like the twist ending. So if you don't want to know the ending, like, I mean, you shouldn't be watching this video. You want me to see me like ranting about books if you really want to watch these, but if you really want to read these books. But basically, she is accused of committing a murder in this book. And you're having two timelines basically where she is in jail for like being investigated for this murder, and then you like learn about her growing up and like maybe what could have happened. And like at the end, the kind of two timelines like converge into one. She has a lawyer who's on her side and like really wants to help her for like no reason. She's just being like completely unhelpful and will not help him at all, but he like takes it on and he like wins this case for her, and she is released, and like also like makes everyone feel really guilty for even suspecting that she could do this murder. And it's like all about how they have treated her really badly because she's like this abandoned girl, and you know, like they failed her as a community and everything. It turns out she did do the murder. Not only did she did it in cold blood. She did it to such an extremely well thought out way that there was no evidence that she could have been convicted for that crime. But then instead of like us getting these portions of when she's being accused of this crime, she's like in the jail where she's just like utterly silent and will not communicate to anyone. You don't get any of this like resolution of like, why did she do it? How does she feel about it? What actually happened? And like, how does she feel afterwards when she got released? And then she just lived this like very happy life like into her old age, like with the love of her life at the end. And it just like that would have been so much more interesting. Like, why didn't we actually follow the fact that she like flipped at this one point and she actually killed someone, like, and then she managed to get away with it? Like, there was all this like crime mystery bit kind of shoved in at the end where the whole other rest of the book was at an odds with what they were trying to do by the end of it. And it kind of felt like just at the end they were like, oh no, like she did do it, like, because it's just this big twist, and also like she got away with it because she's so good at everything. I don't know, like it was just bad. I just really hated this book. Like, I feel like I can't like keep ranting on about every single book because we're never going to get through all of the books I've got for this video. But basically, I didn't like this one at all. Okay, so I've been talking for too long. This was too many books to try and fit into one video. I'm going to make this as a part 2 as well. I'm going to do a whole other ranting video, depending on if you guys like this one. But it is kind of fun to just be purely negative in a video. So I'm just going to talk about one more book and then we'll round it off there. And this last book is one that I have such complicated feelings about, but I did ultimately hate this incredibly popular book, and it is also another classic, and that book is Lolita. This one, I get it. I get why people like it. It made me feel violently ill. Like, it's so bad, but also I understand in the fact that it is incredibly well written. There are beautiful quotes from this book, and I'm not usually even like a quote person. I'm not someone who like, the writing style is not my like highest priority, but this book is undeniably beautifully written. But if you're unfamiliar, this book is from the perspective of a paedophile, and it is about the romance that he perceives he has with a young child. And because it is so well written, you are inside of the mind of this man. And when I was reading it, it made me feel such high levels of like disgust, because it was, you have to, when you're reading a book, like you are reading it in your own mind. And I just could not get over that fact. In a way, I'm glad I've read it because I feel like it gives me a better perspective. This light is going crazy. This is another reason why we're doing this as a part 2. I feel like I've got a better perspective on other books. Like, it's like for a cultural reason, I'm glad that I've read it. But also, I would never, ever recommend anyone to read this book, and I would never read it again. Especially if you've got young children in your life. If you have any history of any of the like very triggering topics that are in this book, I would just say steer clear, because it's not one of those ones that you can just like kind of glancingly read through. Like, it is one of those books that really actually worms its way into your brain. For me, in an incredibly devastatingly negative way. Like, I hated this book, and it was like a painful experience to read. The way that I actually managed to, if you are very curious about this book, and I know that these kind of like ranting videos sometimes makes you more curious about reading the book, I would say with this book, if you're curious about it, but you are more sensitive to these topics, but you still want to read it, I would say the way that I read it and the way that I managed to get through it is I read it more as an analytical exercise, and I read it alongside a study guide, because I felt like in a way that was creating some distance between my experience of like reading the book and the way that I was kind of like analysing it as well. It actually made me appreciate the book more as well in many ways, because I just think that's like a very fun way sometimes to read classics, is like read them as if you are studying them, or like you're revising them, or like gonna be writing an essay on them. I think it's like a fun way to like try and improve your reading. But for this one, it was really necessary to have that like layer of kind of space between me and the experience of reading this book. The other thing I will say though about this book that people don't often talk about is it's absolutely wild. Like, it is not this kind of like soft, you know, romance in any sense. It's like the way this book ends is crazy, and like there's lots of action that happens in this book, and a lot of it is really, really wild, and also doesn't like quite make sense, like in a lot of ways. Like, a lot of the action sequences, like by the end I was like, what is actually happening here? Like, a lot of the main attention for this book went on the writing and like the messaging and the theming and like what it was trying to say, and not a lot went on like resolving kind of plot. So I would say that as well, like as another negative point to reading this book. If you don't want to read this book but you think the topic area is interesting to you, I have a 5-star book recommendation that uses a lot of the kind of themes and motifs from Lolita, but is, I think, done in a much better way, because you're reading from the perspective of the victim, and that is My Dark Vanessa. I absolutely loved this book, and I would wholeheartedly recommend it as well. If you like Lolita, if you're interested in Lolita and you don't want to read Lolita, then read My Dark Vanessa. It's beautifully written, it is heartbreaking, it is kind of cathartic in a way, just like an absolutely incredible book. Would highly recommend that one. But this video is not about books I recommend, it's about books that I hate, and Lolita has to be on that list. But that is the final one that I'm going to talk about in this video, because this was supposed to be kind of a short little short video, but maybe I will do a part 2. Obviously, coming up soon in the next few weeks is going to be my worst books of the year video. I'm planning what's going to be on that one as well, because most of these I haven't read actually this year, so I'm going to be doing another short like ranting video of just the worst ones that I've read in this year. It's not going to be as ranting as this, because I didn't read that many 1-star books this year, which is great for me. And of course I'll also be doing a 5-star books video as well. I'll do like my book awards video at some point, but all of those videos will be coming in January, because I am a completionist and I believe that you cannot know your best books of the year in the last week of December. You have to wait until January to be able to do these kind of like wrap up videos for the year. So those are all coming, and that is going to be all from me today. Thank you so much for watching this video. This light is insane, which is one of the reasons why we're ending the video here, honestly. But thank you so much for watching. Please comment below one of the books that you just do not like at all that everybody else loves. And please remember to leave a like and go and watch all of my other videos, and I'll talk to you again soon. Bye!